Hey everybody, it is Saturday morning and I just got the lights turned on a couple of minutes ago. Walked out of the room, got my phone, and now we are going to shoot an around the world video. We're going to do it kind of spur of the moment, so you're all going to get to see what's going on in my tanks at the same time I get to see what's going on in my tanks for the morning. So nothing really going on in my waterfall tank. I topped it off yesterday. I didn't do any kind of water change or anything like that. I did recently add some floating water Sprite in here. You can see it's still doing pretty well. This is the stuff that had gotten frozen in the bucket outside. So you can see I've got a new growth coming up, well out of the water already. And I think it's pretty clear at this point that being in that bucket of ice water had no ill effect on that water Sprite whatsoever. So I'm pretty excited about that. We'll go ahead and turn this light on real quick. Gonna look in the tank. Tank wise, the only thing different that I've noticed in this tank is that my final platinum guppy died. I noticed it in there on the bottom of the tank last night. I actually never even got in there to get it out of the tank, and I don't see it this morning, so it probably got either nibbled up or just decayed away over the course of the night. One small guppy like that is not going to be any big deal. Not too worried about that. My little foot tank here, still just ticking over. Haven't really done anything with this tank in quite a while. I need to get in there and at the very least remove some of that duckweed. Maybe do a little bit of a look inside, see if I've still got shrimp going on in there. I know I've still got guppies in there, and I know I've still got my male cherry barb is still swimming around in there. Other than that, not really sure. This tank just kind of sits there on the floor, and I don't pay a whole lot of attention to it. As long as the water's still flowing and I still see fish swimming around in there, I just go ahead and put food in there every day for them and make sure everybody's still doing their thing. Otherwise, not a lot to talk about with the waterfall itself. I haven't really gotten up here and done anything. Haven't really tinkered around with trying to redo it or anything like that. I do have some plants that I've tucked in up here. We're seeing a little bit of growth coming off of them, so that's good. I got in recently and trimmed out a bunch of the yellowing fronds on my daylily here, so that's looking pretty good. It'll be interesting to see if we get another flower spike anytime soon. I suspect not. It will probably have to go through a cold cycle and then a warming up cycle for it to basically reset itself. Plants that bloom annually but are not annuals, perennial plants that only bloom once during the summer, usually need to go through a winter dormant period to sort of reset themselves before they bloom again. If you just keep them in warmth all the time, like I'm doing with this daylily here, then I don't suspect it'll just continue to bloom again. And I wouldn't even be surprised if we don't even get any blooms off of it next summer, if we just let it keep going and going and going and never give it that winter cycle that it should be experiencing right now. So it'll be interesting to see what happens to that over the course of next spring or summer, whether we get any more flowers off of the water Sprite or not. Otherwise, not much else to talk about. I did throw some floating water Sprite back here. We'll see if that ever takes off. And my little experiment with my peace lily there, I'm going to see if I can, oops, sorry about that, just banged into the microphone. My little peace lily there, I'm going to see if I can't get that to grow up and out and have an actual peace lily or Brazilian sword growing in my waterfall tank. I think that would be pretty cool looking. So that's about it for the waterfall tank. I'm going to go ahead and shut all these lights off so that they don't put too much glare on the rest of the tanks as we go around the room. I think we'll be okay leaving that one on for the time being. So we will start here at my 29 miscellaneous. This tank is in need of a little bit of work. There's two things I want to do while I'm in here other than simply topping it off, is wiping the glass down, and I want to adjust the thermometer. I'm sorry, the heater. This tank always feels really warm whenever I stick my hands in there, and I've never really adjusted the heater in all the years it's been sitting there, so I'm assuming I probably set it up at more of a tropical type temperature earlier on in the hobby, and as I've come to realize I don't need such warm temperatures in my tanks, I've really kind of gotten away from that. But this tank has just been set up and it's been ticking over like a clock for years and years, and it probably still just has the temperature set up around 80 degrees or 81 degrees or something like that. It's really warm, and And that is probably why almost every time we look at this tank, I talk about how it needs to be topped off again. And it would also explain why when I lost my angelfish in this tank about a week ago, it had gotten itself wedged down between the rocks. And if they get wedged in there too tight, they can't move their gill flaps and they effectively suffocate or drown or whatever you want to call it. But they lose their ability to exchange gas and they suffocate. And so that's what happened. And it had only been anywhere from 24 to 36 hours at the most since the angelfish had died. And yet when I pulled the angelfish out, it was well on its way to decomposition. It stunk. It was all bloated. It was starting to get like nasty feeling. And that's really, really fast for that amount of decomposition to occur. So I can only assume it's those nice warm temperatures in the tank that was speeding that process along. So that's my goal next time I get in here. I'm going to do a little water change, get the glass cleaned down, and get that heater in there knocked back a couple of degrees and get it into about the mid-70s or maybe a couple of degrees above room temperature, which is about where I like to keep my tank sitting. Otherwise, nothing really to talk about. Tank's still just ticking over like a clock. I'm almost afraid to adjust the heat. I've had the tank set up for so long, and it's been so good. I've had so few problems with this tank. I just imagine I'm going to adjust it by 1 degree, and this will become my new problem tank or something. I don't know. I'm probably getting a little more worried than I need to be by just knocking the temperature back a few degrees. But if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You know, comes to mind, and this is just one of those things. I know how easy it is to really, really throw a tank off by tinkering with it a little bit. Again, I'm probably, you know, getting a little more worried than I need to be just for a simple couple of degree change in temperature. Here is my 55-gallon Gourami tank, and as you can probably tell, I need to get in there and wipe down the glass. I know that stuff looks bright purple on camera for some reason, but it is sort of a reddish, brown, rusty color to my eye, and it doesn't look bad in the tank. It just looks really bad when it's all over the glass like that, and you actually can't really even see into the tank. But if you do get in there and look around, you can see that stuff is growing on some of the rocks over here. This rock has a little bit of it growing on it, but it's not too bad. It's not overwhelming the tank. This side of the tank has the floating water sprite in it, which blocks a lot of the light from coming down into the tank. And then this side, of course, has the filter flow, which pushes any kind of floating vegetation out of the way, and this side is the side that the glass gets all the light. And well, you can see the difference between the side that gets all the light and the side that doesn't get all the light. So that'll be on my list of things to get done. I really do need to get in and get this tank looked at and maintained a little bit. The main thing I want to do in this tank is check my filter, and we will probably be doing a video on that pretty soon. My spray bars, believe it or not, that spray bar is facing up and forward, and so that little tiny bit of water you see moving right there is how little flow we've actually got coming out of my spray bar at the moment. You see how the holes are facing up and forward, and yet we're getting that. I mean, I should have like rippling, bubbling, you know, water at the surface, and yet I'm getting that. And so I've cleaned out the intake a couple of times, and I've cleaned the filter, and I'm still getting this really reduced flow coming out of this one. So I think what I need to do is actually pull the filter apart, and just like in my hang on the back filters that I occasionally have to get in there and clean the impeller, and all of the, you know, the intake flow right where the impeller is gets all gummed up in my hang on the back. So I think it's about time I do that on one of my canister filters. I've never done it before, so I'll do a video about it, just sort of figuring it out, and we'll see what needs to be done. And once I figured it out, I'll show you all how I did it, and that'll be a video coming up here pretty soon, so make sure you're subscribed for that. Moving on to my 55-gallon tank. Not much going on in this tank. Give my Pleco a big kiss. Their mouths don't look quite so suckery when they're up close like that, do they? So that is my high-finned spotted Pleco hanging out, hiding in the anubias. One of these days I'm going to get in here and chop this anubias down. This is one of those tanks I've been talking about for a long time. I really want to get in here and mix it up and do something. When you look at it, it's just got two massive anubias plants in there that have been growing for years and years. So I don't want to get rid of them, but I do want to change up the way the tank looks a little bit. Maybe cut the anubias off here and here, you know, here, and just make them a little more compact. I will have lots and lots of large anubias rhizomes for sale. I've actually got some anubias rhizomes for sale right now. If anybody's interested, check out my email down below. I've got some other plants available too if you're interested. Java fern, water sprite, etc. So this tank also needs to get treated for the cyanobacteria. It's green, it's gotten into the tank, and now it's starting to overwhelm the tank a little bit. But you can see everything's still doing okay. I've got a flower spike here. I've got another flower spike here. There's actually 2 little flower spikes right there. I've got new green growth all over my my anubias. So I really need to get in there at this point and just do some maintenance. I need to trim out some of these dead leaves, get in there, maybe thin out the roots a little bit, and trim back the rhizome so it's not so bulky in the tank. As far as the inhabitants go, I've seen my South American bumblebee catfish in this tank a few times now that it's over here. In fact, the other day when I turned the lights on, the catfish was actually up in the leaves, and of course, did its panic thing when the lights came on and swam down and disappeared into the back of the tank somewhere. But it is still in there. It is still doing well. All my diamond tetras are doing okay. My angelfish back there is hiding from us at the moment, but he's doing okay. And as far as I know, my hatchet fish are still doing okay. Hardly ever see these because they sit up at the surface. Another reason I don't recommend these fish, if you're standing here in front of the tank, you never see those hatchet fish, or you rarely see those hatchet fish. You almost have to sit down in a chair at a lower level in front of the tank to be able to see the hatchet fish. Now, of course, you could do the open top tank where you'd be able to look in and see them. But if you do an open top tank with hatchet fish, you don't have hatchet fish for very long. So you kind of have to, it's one way or the other. You either have a lid on it and you have to squat down and look up, or you don't have a lid and then you just don't have hatchet fish, because even with the lid on, I started out with 6 or 7 of these and I'm down to 3, and they find tiny little gaps to jump out of. I have this one covered up by a piece of wood, but see that? Occasionally that piece of wood will get moved when the light gets shifted around, and that little tiny gap right there would be enough for a hatchet fish to come up and out of. They will, if there's a gap that wide, they're wafer thin, they'll slip right out of it and be gone. So you've got to keep your hatchet fish covered or you won't have hatchet fish. Moving on to my 40 breeder. This is another one of those tanks that's just kind of sitting here doing its thing. I'm going to be doing some work on this tank one of these days, but it's just, again, it's just a one of these days thing. I'll have to be in the right mood for it. Everything will have to line up. There's nothing wrong with the way the tank is sitting now. It's just, I feel like it's time to change it up. I want to get in there and thin out the plants. They're growing so dense and compact at this point. I don't know. It's just that there's not enough room for the fish to swim around. I've downed a very few fish in the tank. Most of the fish that are in the tank are actually cleaner type fish. I want to remove the rainbow fish there. I don't think it's particularly happy being in there by itself like that. So the rainbow fish I want to take out and put in my 125 with my other rainbow fish. And then I've got 4 of those Siamese algae eaters in here, and I want to take 2 of those and put those in my 125 as well. I'm having a lot of problems with hair algae in my 125, and I have found that those Siamese algae eaters, the true Siamese algae eaters, not the Chinese algae eaters and not the flying foxes, but the true Siamese algae eaters devastate hair algae. They destroy hair algae. So I want to take 2 of them out of this tank and put them in my 125, and they will be able to work their magic over there. But you can see how, I really need to get in there and thin these plants out. It's so dense. It's like there's not even water flow moving through them anymore. The plants are so dense in this tank. So one of these days I'll get in there and do something about it, but probably not today. Who knows? I don't know. It's Saturday. It's freezing cold and snowy out, so maybe I'll spend the afternoon tinkering around here in the fish room like the good old days. So moving on to my 125-gallon New World tank real quickly while they're still out and about on the glass. You can see one of my nearite snails right there. And you can see another one of my nearite snails right there. And in fact, the other day, when I was looking in the tank, I saw 3 nearite snails out on the glass at the same time. So I thought I was down to none. I thought all the nearite snails I'd put in this tank had eventually died off, but apparently not. And not only did I still have 1, I still have 3. Speaking of the devil, there's the 3rd one right there. It even looks like it's got eggs or something on its back from before. And not really sure why this stick... Oh, you know what? I was thinking that stick was floating for some reason and it had worked its way up. But that stick normally lies right here across the bottom. And what I would be willing to bet happened is the white suckerfish on the bottom dashed. And when he dashed, he actually kicked that piece of wood up so hard that it flipped it up on top of that anubias where it stayed. So you take it off the anubias and it will sink, or at least it should sink. This is kind of interesting. I'm getting a ton of buoyancy out of this piece of wood, and it's a piece of wood that has been in the tank and on the bottom for a long time. I wonder if it had some air bubbles stuck to it or something, because I just gave it a little more of a brisk shove downwards and it actually did start sinking, but now it's actually just kind of staying right there. The current, you can see the current's flowing this way. It's almost like the current's holding it up, pushing it up. That is really weird. Why a piece of wood that's been at the bottom of a tank for years, literally that piece of wood has been underwater for years and is now suddenly starting to float. I know that happens with, you know, I'll say organic, like, you know, fish animals and bodies and stuff. As the gases start to develop in the decomposition process, the gases will cause you know, dead animals or dead fish to become buoyant sometimes, but I've never heard of a piece of wood becoming buoyant after being submerged in a tank for a long period of time. That's really, really strange. So, alright everybody, you got to enjoy that little discovery with me. Moving on to my native tank. Let me turn this fan off here. I always keep a fan blowing in this room just to keep the air circulating around, otherwise it gets all musty and stuffy and humid in here. It's a pretty good look at my darter. I do believe this is a tessellated darter. I've mentioned this before. Out of my options, it could possibly be a Chesapeake darter, but they are endangered and they don't really, not really in their area. So chances are more than likely that what that is just a common tessellated darter. And the fact that tessellated darters are very common even more kind of convinces me that I'm far more likely to have a fish that's common than one that's rare, especially since I catch these things all the time. So I doubt I have some treasure trove of rare fish that are just abundantly breeding in my little stream across the street. Chances are much more than likely that this is just a common tessellated darter that you can find pretty much anywhere in any stream around here. Doesn't change the fact that it's an awesome little fish. And you can see where it gets its name, darter. They don't really swim any kind of long distances. They just make these short little darts and dashes. So just shot a good video last night. Got some good crayfish action. Got some good close-ups. Got a little bit of tussling between two crayfish. Thought I was going to get to see some action with the third one. The crayfish came from over here and was kind of coming up behind the other one, but he wound up shoving this piece of wood out of his way and going about his business, going on towards the back of the tank somewhere. So this is definitely shaping up to be one of my favorite tanks. Just so much fun to look at. It's so natural looking. It looks so natural to my area. I don't know where you live. If you live in Hawaii, this might not be what the streams, you know, around you look like. But if you live in Maryland, this is exactly what the streams around here look like. So on days like today, when it's 25 degrees out and there's icy snow all over the ground, I can still be standing right here in front of my local stream watching my beloved little crayfish crawl around and my little minnows swimming around. It's just like bringing a little slice of my outdoors right here into my basement, and that was the whole point. I've spent my whole life playing around streams and fishing and hiking, and you know, that's just such a huge part of my life that not having that is tough for me in the winter. I really struggle, you know, just being cooped up in the house and the snow and the cold and the dark nights and the gray days. You know what I'm talking about. If you live in the northern hemisphere, you know what winter's like. It's awful, at least for me. I know some people out there love winter, but I hate it. And stuff like this really, really helps me get through it. So for my regular viewers who remember this as my gudgeon tank, you know, what do you think now? That gudgeon was a cool fish and everything, but isn't this so much better than that gudgeon tank? That gudgeon was so boring. It was an interesting fish in a certain sense, but to actually experience it and watch it was a very boring fish. It just sat there and did basically nothing. It prevented me from putting other fish in the tank, and so it was this huge tank with just one fish that just sat there in the shadows doing nothing all the time. And now I've got an actual slice of my outdoors right here, and that literally is gravel that was collected at the stream, sticks that were collected at the stream, all the animals were collected at the stream, all the woodwork was collected at the stream. I've even brought those leaves in from outdoors. The plants were collected out at the reservoir. So this is absolutely 100% a slice of my little outdoors right here in my fish room, and I've been really, really enjoying this tank so far. So I hope you all have too. So moving on to my 125. This tank is kind of under construction. Well, not under construction, but under a little bit of work right now. I have treated for cyanobacteria. In theory, I'm kind of done, but I'm still just sort of sitting and waiting. You can kind of see how there's a little bit of green left on some of the rocks, but most of it just looks like algae at this point. I don't see any of that bright green sheeting type of growth that is associated with the cyanobacteria. So without having the cyanobacteria growing all over everything, I don't know whether I should treat it again for, with the ChemiClean. However, I've already got the air stones in there. I've got ChemiClean that's fairly inexpensive, easy to use. I'm thinking I may want to just throw one more dose in there while I've got the air stones in there. Give it a few more days. We'll do one more water change, and then we'll pull those air stones out of there, and we'll have this tank back up and running to normal function. But otherwise, like I say, it's fine. It's just one of those, why not? Better safe than sorry. I've been paying a little more attention to the cyanobacteria in my tanks and where it develops and how it develops. And I really think that when I do these ChemiClean treatments, I need to not just go by strictly what it says on the label. I need to go by what I'm seeing with my own eyes and sort of make sure that my tank is done before I wrap up the treatment. I think that's one of my problems, is that I do a simple treatment and I don't fully eradicate it from the tank, and I just let it sort of start back up and start building over again. So this time I want to make sure we've fully eradicated it from the tank. That's not to say it won't come back. Just because you get it out of the tank doesn't mean it's not going to get back in the tank, but it will take much, much longer for it to start accumulating and making the tank look bad again. At this point, my chief concern in the tank is the hair algae. It's not out of control, it's not crazy, but you can see it. You can see that hair algae just flowing off of everything, and it's just in there and in the tank. And it just gives everything that sort of green, fuzzy, hairy look. And so I think those Siamese algae eaters, the Siamese algae eaters, I'm getting myself confused now. I think 2 of those Siamese algae eaters in this tank would just do wonders for all that hair algae and just make it look amazing. So that's my plan. We'll see when it ever comes to fruition, but that's the idea. Moving on to my 20-gallon Angelfish tank. I'm beginning to work on this tank. In fact, we're going to be shooting a video about this tank here very soon. I was going to start yesterday, but I decided that I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get in there and start doing some cleaning. I've been deliberately sort of letting this tank go for the purposes of hey everybody, let's start from this just riddled with cyanobacteria, this tank that's just covered in green, and let's start from there and see what it takes to really get this tank cleaned up. But I kind of started without you because last night I decided I couldn't take it anymore, and I got in there and I just started physically removing cyanobacteria, and I'm not kidding, I probably removed a 1/4 pound of it. I had a bucket that it had weight to it when I was done. I pulled sheets of it up off the bottom. I wiped off the glass, I didn't do a perfect job. I just wanted to get the bulk of it out of there. And you can see I didn't even get in and get all of the big, easy to grab chunks out, but I did get in there and I grabbed the big, easy to get out chunks. And again, my regular viewers will know how green this tank normally looks, and I just pulled so much out of there by hand that I'm now going to start the ChemiClean treatment on this tank, and we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to eradicate it out of this tank and see how long it takes to come back, because this tank is my problem tank. I do get the cyanobacteria in my other tanks, and my regular viewers know all about that. I'm not going to have a big discussion about that. It's usually not that big of an issue. This tank, however, it just comes back so fast and with such a vengeance, and it just gets so thick so quickly. I have no idea what is going on in this tank. I have no idea why this tank just gets gobbled up by that cyanobacteria every time. And I mean, almost immediately after I'm done a treatment, it's just growing a green sheet across the bottom again. I have no idea why this tank reacts that way. It's nothing special about this tank. It's set up basically the same way my other ones are. I've even tried removing, I had the filter over here. I tried putting the filter over here to give me some more water flow through the vegetation. That hasn't really had much of an impact. So yesterday I took the light and I lifted it up about 8 inches, and while that may not seem like much, when you move a light away from its source, or you move something away from the light source, it's the law of inverse square, or I think that's how it's pronounced or said. So basically what happens is every time you double the distance, you quarter the intensity. So moving a light away 8 inches or 10 inches or something actually does have a significant impact on the amount of energy that's going into the tank. So hopefully, maybe by reducing the light even just by a little bit like that, we might be able to sort of cut back on how fast this tank regrows its cyanobacteria. But anyway you slice it, this tank is my problem tank when it comes to cyanobacteria. I don't know what it is about this tank that makes it come back the way it does, but it sure does. I mean, I don't know, maybe it's because it's the first, tank right as you walk into the fish room. It's right here by the open door. Maybe, all the air being blown in is bringing cyanobacteria in the room with me. And, I'm bringing airborne cyanobacteria that lands right in this tank and starts growing immediately. Although, I don't know why. It would just have to go right there to that tank. But it doesn't for some reason. I don't get it growing like that in that tank. So anyway, moving on from that tank, there's nothing in my quarantine tanks. There's no point in even looking at that one. Have a look at my Brackish tank here. I got to get in here and do some work too. I need to vacuum up all of the sea of snail shells at the bottom. Want to get in there and clean up some of that, what's left of that Java fern in there, pull all the dead stuff out. And all of this was, what is that called? Hydrilla. I collected up out of the reservoir. I thought it would do well in this harder water that I've got in this tank. It's almost brackish. And it was doing well at first, but now it looks like that. So I need to get in there and pull all that stuff out there too. That looks like garbage. The little guppies I put in here, you can see swimming around here and there, doing well. I've never done a head count. I didn't count them when I put them in. And I don't know how many are in there, but I put probably 6 to 10, something like that in there. Maybe even a little more, maybe even a dozen. You can see one down in the back down there, and occasionally you'll see them swimming around down at the bottom. So Butterbean might take the occasional nip at one. I don't know. I'm pretty sure he wound up eating all of my bumblebee gobies at some point. I used to have a lot of bumblebee gobies, but one by one they would vanish. And then one day I came down and I saw Butterbean swimming around with a dead bumblebee goby in his mouth. And so I don't know if he had just picked up a dead goby and was swimming around with it, or if he had actually killed the goby and was just sort of slowly working on it and eating it as he made his way around the tank. But I definitely saw Butterbean swimming around the tank with a dead goby in his mouth. And so I kind of chalked it up to him being the reason I don't have gobies in the tank anymore. So we'll see what happens with the guppies. I'm not too concerned about whether he eats them or not. If they do, if he does, it'll be a nice, nutritious little snack for him. But I feed him well enough, and you can see how fat and plump and happy he is, that he's probably not terribly interested in them other than just something to look at and have as tank mates as opposed to a food source. So I'm not going to worry too much about that. As far as Butterbean himself goes, he's doing well. All his lesions and all those white spots and everything have pretty much cleared up. I have no idea what that was. I have no idea why being kept in brackish water would have done that to him, but that seems to be what the problem was. I've reduced the water from a brackish level of salinity. I'm now just below a brackish level of salinity, so technically this would be considered fresh water. Although if you tasted it, you'd probably think it tasted a little bit salty, but technically this is fresh water. And his lesions and everything have all cleared up, and he's looking good and healthy again. So I'm going to leave it at fresh water. Maybe we'll have a video where we discuss that a little more in the future. But for now, we're going to call that the end of this video, where we've made it all the way back around the world to where we started, more or less. So we're back to my 29 miscellaneous. I'm going to say thanks for watching. Managed to keep this one just under half an hour, so that's pretty good for me. Hope you enjoyed. Make sure you're subscribed, and I'll see you real soon in the next one.